Gauthier scored 41 goals last season, and right now, with training camp just weeks away, he still doesn't have a contract for this one. Let's start with why this is even a conversation. Gauthier just turned in the best season of his career, and it wasn't close. At only 22 years old, he put up 41 goals and 69 points, numbers that placed him among the highest scoring forwards in the entire league. That kind of production changes everything about a contract negotiation. A restricted free agent coming off a season like that isn't looking at a modest raise. He's looking at a deal that reflects true difference-maker money, and that's exactly the tension sitting at the center of this standoff. Gauthier's camp knows what he's worth coming off a breakout year like this, and Anaheim has to figure out how to actually pay for it. Here's the complication. Gauthier has played just 159 regular season NHL games in his career. One huge season is exactly that, one season. So while his camp is negotiating off the strength of that breakout year, the organization also has to weigh the long-term risk of committing superstar money to a player with a fairly short track record at this level. That's the balancing act defining this entire negotiation. It's also worth remembering the road that got him here in the first place. Gauthier arrived in Anaheim in a trade back in January of 2024, and he took his time developing into this version of himself. He didn't step in and immediately become a 40-goal scorer. He built toward it, game by game, over the past couple of seasons before this breakout finally arrived. That progression matters when you're trying to figure out whether this production is the new normal for him or a peak year that's going to be difficult to sustain. Both sides clearly see it differently, and that disagreement is a big part of why this has dragged into the summer without a resolution. To understand why this has dragged on, you have to go back to one specific move that reshaped Anaheim's entire cap situation. Philadelphia sent restricted free agent Leo Carlsson a 5-year offer sheet worth $18 million a year in average annual value. Anaheim matched it, which they were within their rights to do, but doing so instantly made Carlsson one of the highest-paid players in the entire NHL by that measure. That single transaction blew a massive hole in Anaheim's flexibility right as they still needed to lock up Gauthier, and it didn't stop there. This same offseason, the Ducks watched their blue line get completely reshuffled. Former captain Radko Gudas left in free agency. Veteran defenseman Jacob Trouba signed elsewhere too. On top of that, Olin Zellweger was traded away to Buffalo. That's a significant amount of experienced depth walking out the door in a single summer. All while the front office was also trying to figure out how to fit Gauthier under the cap. Add it all up, and Anaheim is currently sitting on right around $9 million in available cap space. For a player many believe deserves a deal in the $13 to $15 million range annually, that math simply doesn't work without moving more money off the books first. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth mentioning. Winger Troy Terry is expected to miss the beginning of next season recovering from hip surgery, with a return timeline pointing toward November or December. If Anaheim places him on long-term injured reserve, that actually gives them a path to exceed the regular cap ceiling by the amount of his cap hit for as long as he's out. It's not a permanent fix, and it's tied to a teammate's injury rather than a real long-term solution. But it could realistically give the front office a bit of breathing room early in the season if the sides are still working toward a deal once October arrives. So what has actually been put on the table? According to NHL Network's Paul Shaheen, Anaheim offered Gauthier a 4-year contract worth $13 million per season. Gauthier and his agent Kurt Overhart turned it down. Think about that number for a second. $13 million a year is not a lowball offer by any stretch. That's genuine top-tier money in today's NHL. The fact that it got rejected tells you exactly how far apart these two sides currently are on term and value. Reports have since suggested Gauthier's camp is looking for something closer to $15 million annually, a number that would put him in the same neighborhood as some of the very best young players in the league. That gap between what's been offered and what's reportedly being asked for is significant, and it explains why this hasn't been resolved yet, despite training camp closing in. One analyst summed up the broader risk here plainly, pointing out that paying top-tier superstar money off the strength of one elite season carries real long-term exposure for the team, especially given how limited Gauthier's overall body of NHL work still is at this stage of his career. What makes this even trickier for Anaheim is Gauthier's limited leverage on paper, combined with real leverage in practice. He isn't eligible to sign an offer sheet with another team, and he doesn't have arbitration rights under his current service time. On paper, that should give Anaheim more control, but in practice, his only real options are to sign what's in front of him or hold out entirely. And holding out is exactly the kind of standoff that can stretch deep into a season if it isn't resolved soon. Fans don't have to look far for a recent example of how that plays out. Goaltender Jeremy Swayman held out with the Boston Bruins before eventually landing a massive long-term contract once the two sides finally came to terms. His season got off to a rocky start after the layoff, and it took him time to find his rhythm once he actually got back on the ice. That's the real risk sitting underneath a standoff like this one. Even if Gauthier eventually gets the number he wants, missing time away from the game during a contract dispute isn't something a player can just switch off once the ink is dry. Given his history, there's been plenty of chatter connecting Gauthier back to Philadelphia, so let's address it directly using what's actually been said on the record. When Daily Faceoff's Anthony DiMarco was asked point-blank about the possibility of a reunion, he didn't hedge. He said plainly that it takes two sides to make an offer sheet work. And given how things ended between Gauthier and the Flyers the first time around, there's no reason to believe he'd have any interest in going back even if the opportunity existed. That history matters here, so let's lay it out. Philadelphia selected Gauthier 5th overall back in 2022. He never suited up for the organization. Instead, he expressed an unwillingness to play for the Flyers and was ultimately traded to Anaheim in January of 2024 in exchange for defenseman Jamie Drysdale and a second-round pick. When asked about his decision at the time, Gauthier called it a personal matter and chose not to elaborate further on the specifics. Given all of that, the realistic read here is straightforward. This isn't heading back toward Philadelphia. The Flyers have already moved on with their own core, re-signing young players like Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras to long-term deals. This situation is playing out entirely between Gauthier and Anaheim, and any resolution is going to come from those two sides working out the money, not from a third team entering the picture. It's also worth pointing out just how unusual this whole dynamic has become around the league. The same offer sheet that started this entire chain reaction, Philadelphia's move for Leo Carlsson, is now indirectly shaping a completely separate negotiation involving a player the Flyers no longer even have on their roster. That's how connected these front office decisions really are. One aggressive move by a rival executive can ripple through an entire organization's cap sheet and touch situations that, on the surface, look like they have nothing to do with each other. So where does this actually go from here? Anaheim has a few paths available, and none of them are simple. The most direct route would be moving additional salary off the roster to create the room needed to meet Gauthier somewhere closer to his camp's asking price. That would likely mean trading a veteran contract to free up several more million in space, giving the front office enough flexibility to get a deal signed before the season starts. The alternative is holding the line on a lower number and risking a genuine holdout, a scenario the league has actually seen play out before, with restricted free agents who felt strongly enough about their value to sit out rather than sign for less than they believe they're worth. There's also a timing element worth understanding. Anaheim's cap situation is expected to loosen up more significantly next summer, once other veteran contracts on the roster come off the books. That's part of why some believe a shorter-term deal at a higher annual value, rather than a long-term commitment, could end up being the middle ground both sides land on. It would let Gauthier get to his next contract sooner, right as Anaheim's financial picture opens up. Whatever direction this goes, the clock is very much ticking. Training camp is right around the corner, and a 22-year-old coming off a 41-goal season, not knowing where he stands heading into a new year, is not the ideal situation for either side involved. There's also a competitive angle Anaheim can't ignore. This team clinched a playoff spot last season for the first time in 8 years, snapping a long postseason drought of their own. Losing a 40-goal scorer for any real stretch of games, whether from a holdout or a late start to training camp, would directly threaten their ability to build on that progress. That's the pressure sitting on Pat Verbeek and the front office right now. This isn't just about getting a fair number on paper. It's about protecting real momentum the organization worked years to build. Here's what we know for certain. Cutter Gauthier remains unsigned as a restricted free agent after rejecting a 4-year, $13 million per year offer from Anaheim. The Ducks are working with roughly $9 million in cap space after matching the Leo Carlsson offer sheet and losing several veteran defensemen this summer. And a reunion with Philadelphia remains extremely unlikely given how that relationship ended.